Okay, we will call to order our Committee of the Whole meeting. And before we start, we will recognize that we're holding today's meeting on the unceded territories of the Sechot and Hupachesit First Nations. We do have an agenda in front of us. Are there any late items to add from Council? Okay, seeing none, any late items from staff?
No late items, Chair Minions, but just for clarity, on the Q&A that was included in the agenda package, question 14 on page 44, if we could just adjust that the staff report would be presented at the April 11th meeting. And then on page 47, Q56, the answer was cut off. So it should just say 2020. It should be 9.8 million capital.
Thank you very much. Would somebody like to move approval of our agenda? Moved
Second.
by Councillor Solda, seconded by Councillor Poon. All in favor? Carried. And we have minutes from the meeting held at 7 p.m. on March 7th, 2022. Would somebody like to move adoption?
Motion.
Moved by Councillor Solda, seconded by Councillor Poon. Any comments on the minutes? Seeing none, all in favor? Carried. No delegations, no unfinished business. So on to staff reports. Item number 1 from the Director of Finance. We have 2022 tax rates. A report from the Director of Finance. Welcome, Andrew.
Okay. So today we're here to start the discussion regarding the tax rates for 2022. Supporting the drafting of this will allow us to set the tax rates when we meet on April the 11th. That's when we'll bring forward the tax rate bylaw for Council to consider. That's associated with the financial plan. Obviously, with the current year, we've seen some significant change across all the classifications in the BC assessment role. So with that, we do have some adjustments to the tax base that are different than what we have normally seen for the City of Port Alberni. So with this, property taxation is the main revenue source for the city. It accounts for about 76% of our revenue. It is very regulated, and the community charter guides us in how we can conduct the tax rate application and have that tax share across all the different classes of properties. With that, BC Assessment provides us with the assessed values annually, and those come out at the start of January, which provides us with that completed roll. There are some adjustments that could be made depending on some appeals that are made by the public, but generally there's not a material change in the overall value. Because generally across the province, only about 1% of the population or property owners will file an appeal. Currently, there's a financial plan increase for property taxes overall at 3.96%. When it comes to the market change that we've seen from BC Assessment from 2021, we did see a 46.1% increase. The market increase was 43.86%, but the overall property classes saw a market increase of 40%. So when it comes to your property values, if you've had a lower than average change in your assessed value, you might see a decrease in your taxes if everything else remained the same. If there's a 0% increase, or if you had a similar increase in your property class or your value within that class, and the taxes were at 3.96% as we provide today, you would likely see that 3.96% increase. But if you've seen a higher than average increase in your property and within that class, you are likely to see an increase in your property taxes greater than the percentage increase that the city has proposed so far. When it comes to non-market change, we've seen quite a significant increase in non-market change in the City of Port Alberni. With that, the residential class has seen a 2.24% increase in non-market change, and an overall increase across all classes at 2.07. And what is non-market change? Non-market change is any new properties that are subdivided that create new assessed values within the role. It could be an addition to your house where you've had a building permit pulled and you see a new assessed value in that addition or that deck. Or it could be a completely new building, as we've seen with Sand Group and some other properties that are building on properties that might have been vacant. So those are the non-market change. When it comes to the property classifications, there are 9 classes. So residential is the largest component of the tax base in the city of Port Alberni. Utilities has a very small portion. That's rail beds and utility infrastructure. Supportive housing is a specific class that is identified by Cabinet, BC Cabinet, and there's a small value in there of $2 in assessed value in the city of Port Alberni. Major industry and Class 5 are 2 of the larger tax bases, along with business in the city of Port Alberni. There is no managed forest lands in the city of Port Alberni, and there are some small amounts in Class 8 and Class 9, but those rates are all tied back to the residential class. So when we look at the distribution that's in the proposed tax rates in front of the committee today, we see that the residential class is at 60.81%. Industrial classes 4 and 5 are at 21.25%, and commercial is at 17.6%. Overall, this accounts for 99.66% of all the property share in the city of Port Alberni if the committee concurs and recommends to council the proposal in front of you today. This attached sheet is in the agenda, but this shows the detailed breakdown of all the property tax across the different property classes. So with that, we've tried to balance the changes that we've seen. Obviously, we've seen the non-market values increase in residential and business and in light industry, but we've seen the decrease in Class 4. So we've tried to balance that and achieve some reasonable increases that are associated with the tax needs for the city in 2022. When we look at the Class 1, the residential class, we see that there is a 3.9% increase for the average residential home, which is $81.33 if we look at the dollars. Now that is taking the average from 2021, the overall single-family home or residence, and divide it by the values in that class to get the average value, which was $330,000 in 2021. Whereas in 2022, the current value is at $480 for that. So, and that has an approximately increase in the residential class for municipalities taxes and the debt load of $81.33, as I said. So with that, I'll just hand it over to council if there's any questions regarding the tax rates or anything that we'd like to discuss, because this is the time for the committee, to have this discussion and ask questions to bring back that information for April the 11th.
Thank you, Andrew. Council, are there questions? Councillor Paulson.
Thanks, Andrew. Just for clarity, and I'm not questioning anything here, but in major industry, we show a decrease of $323,714 tax increase in class. Maybe we could just get a little description of what that's about. And also in light industry, tax percent increase is 90.17%. So maybe you could just clarify how we get to that.
Yeah, certainly. With that, we've seen the SOMAS property obviously decrease in the tax base that's in Class 4. That essentially is no longer in the tax base as a city property. So that has been pulled out, and with that, that tax base has been dropped as far as its share in the overall tax base. So that was rebalanced out throughout all the other classes. But we've seen quite a significant increase in the values in Class 5. So with that, we've rebalanced, and it is the tax share for Class 5 is 90%, as you said, over the prior year. With that, we look at the tax rates that we had for Class 4 and Class 5, and we've delinked those. Historically, Council has directed that those two were linked. So we were usually around 55 to 60 per thousand for those properties in Class 4 and Class 5 in the past, but there was a very small amount of value in Class 5. But when we delinked them last year, we looked at that tax rate in Class 5 to ensure that we're not putting all the burden on that new value. We're spreading that out across all of the tax classes so that everyone has that share and still have a reasonable tax assessment for each class.
Thank you. To just follow up on Councillor Paulson's question, and going back to your numbers on the non-market change, you mentioned that we have a net non-market change of 2.07%. So to clarify, non-market change, is new construction usually. Obviously, that's the biggest amount of value is new construction. We've seen a lot of that in residential, a lot of that in light industrial. But on the other end of that, we've seen a reduction in, I guess that would be the opposite of non-market change, or non-market change the other way, in the SOMAS property. So that 2%, basically, even with the loss of the SOMAS lands, we still have a net gain of new construction of 2.07%.
That is correct.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Solda.
That's too funny, because I was going to ask about non-market, but I do have a question on non-market too, to add to that. So what does, in dollar figures, 2.07% mean for the, just for the residents to understand that, and myself?
Well, if we look at, I guess when I looked at the non-market change and how it would impact Class 1, if we remained at the same level of taxation share in Class 1 as we did last year, the rate of increase for Class 1 would have been 2.51%. So essentially that is at 3.91 with the rebalancing across all the classes. But if we left it at that, I don't have a number exactly. Sorry, I can't give that to you today.
Sorry.
But I could look at that. But it does, like, when we look at the residential class and we look at even at business class, we've seen there was a 2.47% increase in non-market change in business. So we're seeing growth in both residential and business and in light industry. So it does dilute the tax share across everyone, but we still had that large property value that was pulled out of Class 4.
So basically it benefits all, like residential businesses, you just move it all around like a shell.
Well,
Is that the shell game? I know it's not a shell game, but you balance it off in the other areas.
Absolutely. I think
Okay.
what we tried to bring forward for the committee to consider is just a look at something that would be fair to all classes, because we do have the ability to do that.
Fair enough.
To rebalance. That's Council's prerogative, and we're trying to bring forward something that would be reasonable across all the classes that Council could support. So this was the best approach that staff have brought forward. And obviously we can have a discussion today if Council has any other direction, or the committee has direction to Council. Sorry.
Okay, so if you get a chance next meeting, could you just, I would love to know what the amount is that we just kind of shuffled. Thank you, and I think it's great that we're helping the other businesses with that non-market.
Yeah, and I think it's important to note that sometimes when we think about 1% in terms of tax increase, we talk about that being about $250,000 in terms of actual dollars. This is not that. So this 2% isn't $500,000. It's 2% added to the tax base. Is that correct? Not 2% in terms of budget increase.
That's correct, Chair Minions. With that, it's just that's the base that we divide the taxes that we need to collect across all the classes. So it's, yeah, I can have a look at it and try to bring something forward for council to consider, but yeah, I'll take that one back.
Thank you. And just to follow up a little bit more, Councillor Solda, on kind of what Andrew was saying from the answer to your question, I think the important consideration for us today is this how we want to split between the tax classes? Now that we've kind of moved, largely beyond the actual financial plan, the tax rates for each class, are to be set. I think this year is a little bit different than previous years have been because of the SOMAS decision. And if we did what we kind of usually do, then that SOMAS reduction in taxes would fall pretty much solely on the other heavy industry taxpayers. If we took $400,000 out of just that class and applied non-market change within every other class, then residential, might go one way, light industrial might go one way, but basically, largely one taxpayer would be paying for our change in the SOMAS tax base. So I think the approach that's being brought forward is spreading that, and then also spreading the non-market change that has come. So at the end of the day, we're not seeing any one taxpayer, take a hit where others are benefiting because of that SOMAS decision. Whereas if we, not to get too complicated, but if we applied all of the growth that has happened in the residential tax base just to residential, we would see residential taxes go down and heavy industry taxes go way up because they would be impacted by the SOMAS. I think the SOMAS was our decision, so we thought it would make sense for it to be kind of spread out, and then same thing for the rest of the non-market change to be spread out. But this is council's opportunity to shift that or ask more questions if we'd like to see that non-market change applied differently.
I like what we are doing. Thank you,
And at the
Madam
end of the day, it's not then a loss on anyone because we've had a net gain in overall non-market change and new taxation. Councillor Corbeil and Councillor Poon.
Thank you. Andrew, I don't know if you could answer this question, but you said that the residential taxpayer is paying 60.81%. Do you have any idea what the sort of provincial average is? Is that kind of normal, that residents pay about 60%?
Well, Councillor Corbeil, I think when you look at each city, they're very different. So tax base is different. Many municipalities do not have an industrial tax base. So historically, when we look at how we applied taxes, industrial tax base was quite significant as far as the tax share in the city of Port Alberni. We started dialing that back in about 2006 to where it is today, and these have been historically around a 60% share for the residential class. So it varies. I mean, all this information is on the provincial website as far as all the tax shares, and it shows where it's allocated, but it's really dependent on what's in that specific municipality as far as how it's spread. And it's really up to council to make that decision on how they feel it's fair to tax across each class.
Councillor Poon.
Thank you. I appreciate the approach that we're taking on the SOMAS site. I think that, it's a benefit to all taxpayers here to have this property. So I think it should be split equally. Thank you.
Thank you. Split equally, and then of course, no, that's great. And then I think just important to note that it is balanced out by the growth we've seen in other classes as well. So there's not a cost to us in that sense. Councillor Paulson.
Andrew, just another one that jumps into my mind is I would suspect that this year the Sand Group, their improvements to the property and stuff down there come online this year. Probably more so than last year when they were under construction, but a lot of their, and then once again, just to reconfirm, the Sand Group, their sawmill is under light industry. Am I correct there?
That is correct.
And that they would have a major portion of their assessment come online this year, or is it next year?
Councillor Paulson, I'm not clear on where they at as far as what's assessed. So with BC assessment, the values and the condition of that property is based on July 1st of this past year, and the values at October 30th. So There likely is some other growth in light industry from sands investment. So we'll find that out next January as far as what the assessed value is. So, but I'm not sure exactly what it is. So once they might even have more development that they are planning. So it really is dependent on what growth we see. So,
Scott?
I think you can look at the net tax value in that category. You can see it went from basically, 9 million in 2021 to 17 million in 2022. So not to say that was all the sand group, but you can assume that a good portion of it with that, and they've continued to build. So I would think you'd see some increase again for next year likely.
Thank you. Councillor Washington.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. When we talk about the SOMAS lands, I guess it's safe to assume that as that develops, our tax rates will increase down there, be it light industry, business, or even perhaps residential. So that by spreading it out in the beginning, it's all going to come back in different categories in the end. Is that?
Definitely the assumption. Thank you. Councillor Haggard, any questions? Okay. Andrew, one final question for me, and I don't think you probably have the information today, but we had asked at one point about how we compare to other communities in terms of how our taxes have moved over the last 3 to 5 years, and I know you had that information, and I don't think we've included it in the Q&A to date. Correct me if I'm wrong, but wondering if, I know there's a provincially available chart, and wondering if we have that we'd be able to share at a future meeting.
Yes, Chair Minions, we could share that, and we could look at how things have been over the last 3 or 5 years or whatever. Yeah, I can prepare a report for council, for sure.
Thank you. Okay. Any other questions? Okay. Thank you very much, Andrew, for this report and for all the information. Okay, Council, there is a proposed motion, recommendation to Council from the committee. Councillor Poon, would you like to read that?
Yes, I'll move that members of the committee recommend to council that council set the city's 2022 tax rates bylaw based on the proposed tax share as outlined in Appendix A of the staff report titled 2022 Tax Rates and dated March 14th, 2022.
Thank you. Is there a seconder? Seconded by Councillor Washington. And any additional questions or thoughts on alternative structures? Okay, seeing none on the motion, all in favor? Carried. Thank you. Okay. Are we on to the capital projects?
Before we go on to capital projects, Chair, I just wanted to make a note in the financial plan that was in the agenda today.
Oh, yeah, that's great. Thanks.
There is a calculation error on the additional project that we added on March 14th. So if you look on page 29, there's the $60,000 that was added for the Glenwood boiler that was approved at the last meeting. That didn't carry through to the bottom summary total, which shows a $60,000 shortage in the capital projects on page 18. And then the transfer to and from reserves of an increase of 60,000. And then again on page 35, there is that 60,000 that follows through.
Okay.
And
That's great.
Yeah.
Thank you for noting that. Are there any questions on that? I think it's pretty clear. Okay. Thought you might want to present the capital works plan to us.
well, I think I'll start
Great.
and give an introduction to the two directors that are here today to
Wonderful.
support the projects within their purview.
Okay, that's great. Then we will turn it over to you for the capital works review.
Thank you. So what we have in the agenda today is quite a bit different than what we provided in the past. We do have quite a few projects that, have been approved in prior financial plans, and all that had work in progress, and we brought that forward to a prior meeting. We've included that in the audit committee's report, but now I think we have an understanding of where certain projects are. We've included that in the financial plan as far as how we're going to present this moving forward. With that, we would like to add just the reserves from which the capital projects are coming forward. So you have that reserve balance, the committed funds, and then the uncommitted funds available to council for that. So we are working through our year-end reconciliations as far as the audit, and we will populate that at a future meeting. But with that, we do have some projects within the capital plan, and I think we've bounced this back and forth across each department and trying to get an understanding of where certain items have been. And obviously there has been some changes in the manager positions within each department, so we are getting caught up to speed, and obviously want to provide this to council and the public to review and consider and ask questions on. I'll just start off and just highlight a couple things that are in the administrative component of the listing here. So we have the asset management implementation. That is something that we budgeted for in 2021, and we had support from the Alberni Clayoquot Regional District for some contract work that was supported with one of their employees. Unfortunately, with the changes at the ACRD, we were unable to keep that going through 2021, and that ceased. So we carry forward that with the anticipation that we would pick this back up and use those funds in 2022. But we'll bring forward a plan for council as far as that capital component for 2022. We had the printer renewal across the organization, so we just are wrapping that up. We should have that project fairly complete soon. And then we had some payroll improvement processes in the accounting system. So just an add-on so that managers can have some supportive information as far as details and everything that they can review in a much easier fashion, and then it gets uploaded into our software. So there's some automation that will occur, because right now it's a very manual process at our works yards. So we're going to make some changes to improve our payroll process within the accounting package that we currently have. So with that, I'm going to hand it over to Willa Thorpe, who will do the, if I can get it to move ahead here, to do the Parks and Rec and Heritage component of our capital plan.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So wanted to first touch base with council on works in progress. So on page 50 of your agenda package there. So we've got the cultural services, parks, and then facility upgrade components in the work in progress. And so the first item is that cultural services there at the top. So this is components of the annual funding we receive. So this is our partnership with the ACRD. So the City of Port Alberni typically contributes $30,000, the ACRD contributes $30,000, and then a Parks Canada cost-sharing grant covers $60,000. So this is an item that I've come to council over numerous years. So this is the ongoing Parks Canada cost-sharing grant. And so the outstanding balances there from previous years are based on disruptions with COVID. So supply chain issues, contractor availability, that sort of thing. We also were working through the bunker fuel spill at the mill as well, so working through environmental catastrophes out there as well. So all those sort of items contributed to the delay. We expect to have that project complete and caught up by the end of this season of 2022. You'll notice the septic upgrades that are budgeted currently for $249,500, and so that the status there is the line item in pink at the top. So this is, we've reached out again to the consultant, since this is a bit of an old number now. So council may recall Tobin, the individual who came and presented to council and spoke to the septic upgrades. So in 2021, we dealt with flushing the system so that we could, rather than look to change the system entirely or repair and replace, that sort of thing. So we've since gone back to the consultant, the contractor, to confirm, is this still a strong course of action, or what's the recommendation there? So we'll come back to council with an update on that. Then as we move to the middle, the next section on page 50 there, under parks. So you'll notice the two items in the middle that connect the quays and the linking the Roger Creek Trail. So those two projects will commence in 2022. All other items in that section will be complete by December of 2022. And then the last item I wanted to bring your attention to with projects in progress is under the facilities upgrades. So there's the Echo canopy and siding, so that is a safety concern that we're addressing here in 2022. And then the curling rink ice plant contribution. So this is an item that council has approved in previous years. We've kept a bit of a placeholder that if the curling club is looking for grant funding or other funding sources, would the city look to assist as well? So we've left that placeholder in place. To date, the curling club has not indicated a status of a grant or need for those funds. This is why it's sitting as unspent to date. Any questions on works in progress?
Councillor Corbeil.
If I could, the linking of Roger Creek Trail, is that the trail that eventually would go to Roger Creek Park? Is that what that is, Will?
So this would be adjacent to the existing Millstone Park, and I believe would be tied into the Connect the Keys project.
Okay.
Councillor Washington.
Thank you, Madam Chair. You mentioned the Parks Canada funding. How long is that going to last? Do we know?
No, Madam Chair, we're not sure at this point. It's one of those things that you almost don't want to bring too much attention to because you hope the funding just continues on forevermore. There's an endless list of projects we'd like to do at the mill, so we love to capitalize on the funding. The reality is it's really hard to know at this stage. We haven't heard anything definitive that there's no reason why it wouldn't continue. However, it's really tough to say the direction that the federal government might go.
Other questions? Was the McLean Mill Septic Upgrades funded in 2021 then?
Yes.
2021, okay, thank you. So if I understand correctly on that one, we're going back to the consultant to kind of get an update on if that number and action plan is still, so we've got 249,500 for that aside, but pink means past planning, or planning occurring in 2022 and hoping to complete that work next year or this year.
Correct,
But
yes.
next
So that's exactly right, Madam Chair. So going back to the consultant to say, this is what was budgeted, this is what our intent was. Do those numbers still make sense? Does the scope of work still make sense so that we can clearly go forward with confidence?
Thank you. Councillor Solda.
Just a quick question, parks upgrade. I don't see any parks that are on here. Am I missing it? That there's some parks, we have some old parks, right, and that need upgrading. Westport is up really old, and I'm just kind of curious to know about some of our parks on this list.
So, Councillor Solda, are you referring to playground structures?
Yes.
Yes. So council will recall that when we had removed a few of the existing play structures based on safety concerns, that rather than staff trying to just take a piecemeal approach and how do we look at one park or another, the discussion came forward about why don't we look at more of a holistic approach to where do we want to see the community's green spaces and play structures go in future years. So looking at more of an overarching plan as opposed to staff coming to council each year and saying, well, we'll need $100,000 to do this park. And then council's natural question would be, well, what are you going to do next year? Well, we haven't planned that yet, so we'll be back to you next year, and sort of that on and on and on being reactive. Instead, staff had come to council and recommended, let's do as part of the OCP, the Official Community Plan upgrade or update, look at incorporating a parks master plan idea for that exact purpose, that we can all be confident in this is what the approach is and this is the timeline, so that when community is asking, well, when are you going to get to my park? in my neighborhood. We can then say with confidence, this is where you are on the list, as opposed to saying, we're not sure because staff hasn't come with their ask for this specific year. So again, looking at a holistic overarching plan for all of our parks in town, as opposed to one-off play structures each year.
And just a quick question, so that presentation will be made?
Upon the completion of, once we start the OCP process, that of course has just been, the engagement has just started on.
Yep.
So I don't, Madam Chair, I don't have a timeline at this point, but as the OCP process starts, parks will be part of that discussion.
So this is when the public, if they want something in their neighborhood, come see us at the OCP?
Absolutely, and
Excellent.
this is why we encourage community to engage in the OCP engagement process, so that they can speak to exactly what they're looking for in their neighborhoods and ensure their voice is heard.
Super, I like that. Thank you.
Thank you, and I think just for clarity, all of these projects are previously approved projects. This is not like a summary of needs from the community. So, and of course, we can see in the financial plan some future projects, but not in as much detail. But these are all the past projects, not ones that we may need to complete in the future. Other questions? Seeing none. Okay. Thank you very much, Willa.
Okay. Wanted to bring to council's attention as far as capital 2022 projects. So we just covered off the work in progress that we'll be finishing this year, and then the budget for this year as well. So one item I wanted to bring your attention to was under the Parks, Recreation, and Heritage 2022 capital. It talks about facilities asset renewal projects for $167,000. So just to give council some context there. So that list has been pared down, and it only includes items that are critical to meeting the safety and operating requirements of our facilities. So a few of the projects that are included in that $167,000 amount includes items such as changes to our multiplex ice plant. So these are changes our regulators, so Technical Safety BC, after the catastrophe that happened in Fernie a few years back, there's been ongoing changes to regulations. So that means that any community that has an ice plant needs to make associated changes. So that's reflected in that $167,000. It also, that amount includes replacing components at the Aquatic Center and the museum to ensure efficient operation of our air handling units. So if the committee is wondering what are the nice to have projects versus the need to have, staff have worked to eliminate any nice to have project, and this $167,000 is just the cost of doing business to keep us on side with our regulators. The other item I'll draw your attention to as well under Parks, Recreation, and Heritage for 2022 capital is the $200,000 into the train station upgrades to the city contribution. So council will recall their council's already approved that inclusion in the 2022 financial plan to increase that amount by $200,000. That's where it lives in the capital plan. So this isn't a new item. This is the same discussion that council had previously. And I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Thank you. Really appreciate that comment around the nice to have versus need to have, and that is the need to have in the budget. I think especially until that Parks and Rec capital plan is done, so that we have a more comprehensive vision of where we're going and what overall we're trying to achieve. That's really important. And then I guess my question would just be, are those 22 projects going to be completed this year, or will they be for 2023?
They will be completed this year.
Great, thank you. Okay. Not seeing any other questions. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Welcome, Rob.
Thank you. I will try to keep this as brief as possible. There's a lot of projects there, so I'll leave it to everyone to ask questions if need be. I'd just like to start with the past projects, and obviously the spreadsheet that Andrew's created is phenomenal from my perspective. It's easy to follow, and it'll enable us to ask specific questions about projects. I will just bring up a few projects, though, on that list. One is the Coal Creek project on Melrose. It's phase 3 and 4 of a combined sewer overflow, which was completed last week, so that's a good project that will no longer be on that list. As well as the Cowichan Reservoir Trunks water main. That's basically, it's a 6-phase project that we started several years ago, And this year, we just completed Phase 5, which is the portion on 15th from Fowley to Montrose. And so that was just completed last week as well, with the final paving being done. So that's a good start to the year. Also, just a quick update, and I think I provided the similar update a couple weeks ago, is the wastewater treatment facility. We have started construction on the final phase. We're expecting it to be done in the next few months. That'll be completion. The new facility has been up and operating since January 14th, but this will complete the final phase, which is connecting all of our sewer system to that, because currently it goes through the old lagoon. Once we have those works completed, then we can actually decommission the old lagoon, which is frankly removing all of the solids and cleaning out the lagoon. And we would tender that hopefully in the next few weeks. The consultant is just finalizing the tender document, and we would bring those tenders back to council for approval and recommend a bidder on that. And then lastly is the rehabilitation of that old lagoon, which we will do engagement this year with the anticipation of doing those works next year, once we have a vision from the community on what we would like to see. The only other project I'd like to bring forward on this WIP or work in progress list is the Connect the Keys, which we are well within our schedule with design at this current time, and we still anticipate to be having construction this summer and completing late this summer. So that project is on schedule. In relation to the 22 projects, before I go into them, I also just wanted to give council a just really brief update, even though it's been a big portion of my life recently. The Engineers and Geoscientists Act of 101 years was repealed last year, and now we have a Professional Governance Act, which provincially will also eventually incorporate architects and other professionals, which is a cleaner act for them to manage, which is a good thing. However, what it does is it's changed a whole bunch of bylaws for the engineers and changed a bunch of processes for us. And what it is basically we're going to have to document more clearly the work we're doing, and making sure for some of the projects in the past that we may have done in the city where we wouldn't have engineering oversight, now we need engineering oversight. So it's going to impact our workload in the coming years. We are still working through our roles and refining processes in that between ourselves, public works consultants, and contractors that we tender. So we do have a list this year, that our capital list, that's a bit shorter, because we just want to be able to deliver what we promise. And so the rest of the list for 22 is a little bit shorter than we've seen in previous years, and also contributes to us trying to finish these projects from previous years so that we can start taking on this additional requirements. Specifically for the projects this year that I'd like to bring to your attention are, you'll see in every single year, but starting in 2023 and in 2022, where we have engineering design, which the intention is specific projects aren't shown there, but for following years, it's to start the design in the previous year for especially larger projects. So then we can tender them either the year before or very early in the year we want to build it. So we get better bids, better pricing, and it just enables us to actually spend more time doing a better job rather than trying to rush by getting approval for a project in April and then trying to build it before the snow flies type of thing. So that'll be a good process in the future. This is our first year doing it, so we'll refine that value and keep that dialogue going with council every time we're updating the 5-year financial plan. Another project to bring to council's attention is Argyle from 1st to 3rd. We do, and we've found we have monitoring equipment that we're still adjusting, but just from what we've seen in the last couple months and what we knew from monitoring that was done in 2015, is the largest flows of our combined sewer are at Argyle. And the flashing light is up there, and any day it's raining, that light is usually flashing, indicating that there's an overflow. So we do want to focus on that particular catchment area just to start reducing those flows so that we're not seeing so many events. So this is a good extension of the work that was already done up to 1st. So we'll go from 1st to 3rd, separating the sewer system from the sanitary system, and also enabling us at this time, by designing it this year, being able to engage the businesses along there in the community and doing a streetscape change similar to what was done lower below 1st, adjacent to the Thunderbird and that. So we'll continue that streetscape going forward up the hill, just modifying it potentially depending on feedback, landscaping, streetscaping and that as we go higher up the hill. And finally, the last project I just want to speak to is 6th Avenue, just up the hill here, Angus to Argyle. That is a project that we've designed, and we are having our Public Works build it. And we're anticipating to start work on April 4th. We may be in there doing some preliminary works, but real construction is expected to start the first week of April. And we will continue with that project probably over about 10 to 12 weeks till we have completion, and then paving, and then hand it back to the residents along that particular street. So if there are any questions, I'm here to answer them.
Thank you very much. Just want to, I think, first thank you and Willa and Andrew and everyone for this kind of change in process, and really appreciate hearing you talk about doing engineering design, you know, a year in advance, and then putting ourselves in the best position possible to tender rather than being rushed. I think that the whole so much of what I see around process right now, really from especially, you know, some of our newer managers and our existing managers, but is really just bringing new ideas around how we can just continually do better. So really appreciate it, and love seeing this list. This is a huge amount of projects that look like we are, you know, going to be completing soon. So it looks like quite a task, and hope we're able to stay on track with this, but really appreciate that it's broken down so clearly, and all of the information that's there. I will turn it over to Council for questions. Councillor Paulson and then Councillor Washington.
Thank you very much, Rob. This is something that we're looking at, and we certainly discussed at the audit committee meeting the last time out. 2022 is a very aggressive year, it looks like. When I went through this and just jotted down the 2022 projects, so good for you guys on allocating that. Some of the questions was, is there's money outstanding, and are the projects going to get done, or when are they going to get done? And I didn't go through and tally up each individual figure, but 2022 is going to be pretty significant in actually completing the projects and spending the money that is allocated. So one of the questions was, is the money, where's the money sitting and where's it waiting? But thank you for the report. This really sheds a lot of light. You know, and we'll see what happens in 2023 and moving forward. Let's get that sewage lagoon online. Let's get her done.
We're working on it.
Thank you. Councillor Washington.
Thank you, Madam Chair. You mentioned we're decommissioning the old lagoon. So what happens to the old lagoon when we're online with the new system?
Starting probably, I'm hoping by May, we'll be bypassing the old lagoon so we can start drying out, we call it cake, but the solids in the bottom of a lagoon, we dry that out, and then we have to basically dry it out as much as we can so we're not paying to haul water, and then we haul it away to the landfill. And then when that is done, then it's a clean area that then we look at rehabilitation. So really the decommissioning at this point is just removing those solids and breaking open probably on, I'd say, the south side, because it's got diking on all four sides. It's basically a lagoon. And so we'd break it so that it doesn't hold water anymore. So if rain falls in there, it just flows out into what's, I think it's Nupusicapus. I can't remember the name of the creek there anyway. There's a creek adjacent by, so it would just be natural water flow. And then the rehabilitation, which is far more extensive, would be, what do we want that to become? And would we remove all the berming? We need the berming on the west side because that gives us access to the existing or the new facility. But on the other three sides, we could either remove portions of it and leave islands, which is one biologist had recommended we do that for birds and that type of thing. Or we could remove all of it and try to return it back to what it was in a natural setting before man came and built a lagoon. I say man, but humans.
Madam Mayor, if I may. On our question and answers, question 32 refers to the line painting, and that appears to be a pretty hot topic in the grocery stores now that we can walk around without masks on. So it's just I've been saying as soon as the weather gets nice. Is that a fair?
It is, but we're in the same boat as every other well, more because we didn't paint ours last year, but some municipalities were able to acquire paint and get some painting done. We were not. But we're all wanting to get painting done as soon as possible. So we're expecting to paint as soon as weather permits. But reasonably, what I want to do to avoid this in the future is have a multi-year contract with a painter for 3 years, and then we set the terms of that. You're going to be here April 15th, between April 30th, depending on weather type of thing, instead of sitting there with every other municipality going, please do us first.
Thank you. Councillor Solda.
Well, definitely line painting is a hot topic, and that was one of my questions too. And I hope we do it sooner than later, because it's just getting really bad out there, especially with the rain and the glare off the road. You can't see, especially near the pulp mill, you know, like I went, oh my God, there's 2 lanes and I can't find them, right? So anyways, the other topic I want to talk about is sidewalks. That's a really big one for me too. We have some issues on some sidewalks. So how do we work it, and what have we done in the past? Have we done any repairs on our sidewalks? And because we used to have people walk the sidewalks to see. So what are we doing and how are we doing it?
So sidewalks are somewhat in the same category as our pavement, like our roads, for managing those. What we've been doing the last years, we have a GIS technologist, Geographic Information System. Instead of an old system where someone goes around with a clipboard and describes, oh, it's at address 3759, we can now actually pull up a map and have it shown on a map, and then show all these deficiencies, and then also show where we've corrected them. So it's easier to track rather than some huge paper trail where you're trying to figure out, okay, we said we'd do this one, but then this one was more damaged, so we did that one, and trying to basically prioritize them and remember what we've done was challenging just with the paperwork. So now we're able to continue to put it in this mapping system and be able to pull it up and then prioritize that way as well. In that way, you're also able to look at it in the context of adjacent property uses. So if it's adjacent to a senior center or a school, that's a priority, or as opposed to a cul-de-sac where all the 12 people who live on that cul-de-sac all know don't step on that particular block because you're going to trip. So without talking too much about this, we're in mid-process and we have been repairing sidewalks. We just haven't been tracking where we've been repairing them, how much we've been spending them, making it easy. Like, we've been tracking it, but it's not easy to figure out where, when, and how much we've spent. So we have different categories as well, whether it's a damaged sidewalk or whether the sidewalk in some instances was built where it's not accessible friendly. So it's perfectly built as it was supposed to be back in 1940, but it doesn't meet our current standards. So we're trying to look at these in a global context and prioritize them.
Will we have a plan made out for that, for the sidewalks? Do you have a plan, like
Definitely, and
layout?
it is something I would really like to bring to council, because I think it also helps demonstrate how important GIS is. Instead of me coming with a big binder of this is what we've fixed in the last 5 years, I can show you in a map and you can see where we've actually done these repairs. So right now we're in the process of actually tracking them. Part of it is we have a new asset management software that we're implementing, and that's a piece of the puzzle. But prior to that, I would say, and I'm going to commit our department to, in the next few months, having something for council to look at.
I think that's important because the public has been asking, and I think the public needs to know. And there's people on scooters and that the accessibility on some of these sidewalks is the pets, basically. And I'm looking forward to seeing that plan, Madam Mayor.
Thank you. And if I could just ask a follow-up question to Councillor Solda. When the public is noticing specific places, what is the best thing for them to do? Can they phone Public Works and report that? You know, should they be reporting it? Obviously, I think people often report those specific locations to council. And, you know, we can certainly pass them along to you, but I just wonder what best process is to get them, you know, on some kind of list, obviously.
The easiest process for some people might be online, and we have an online on our website where if you have a concern or complaint, and you can fill that out then. If you provide the address, the street, it helps. Or phoning Public Works for those who don't want to go online. And both of those will be tracked then, and then we have it in our system. And so putting those, eventually when people phone in with those, with our new asset management software, it will go straight into that, and it's there. And so we'd be able to see year by year how many calls on certain locations and whether we've addressed it or not, and it will track all of that. I would say for residents as well as, even if you think 100 other people have noticed this, but it still hasn't been fixed, report it. Because one, if it gets more reporting, that'll be higher priority. And two, sometimes, like I remember years ago, people driving by a fire in a city I lived in that was ongoing for about 20 minutes, and it was right next to the hospital. So everyone assumed someone called the fire department. Nobody had called the fire department.
Thank you very much for that. Really appreciate it. I think it's important for people to know how to report that. And certainly I actually didn't know that there was an online tool, so that's great. Thank you. Councillor Paulson.
Just to clarify again, is there a proactive inspection process with regards to sidewalks and those things? Actually almost like a patrol where we have somebody in staff that goes around and marks the sidewalk with paint or whatever, and then the job is done. I just am thinking back to a meeting that I attended with the Association for the Blind here in Port Alberni, and there's two things that came up. Was uneven sidewalks, but also overhanging trees and branches, which the blind have a real problem with. But just wondering if there's some form of, do we have staff that will actually proactively, rather than dealing with a complaint, proactively have a look and say, no, this sidewalk needs to be done, let's get to it and go from there.
We do staff-wise. If staff see something, they'll bring it to someone's attention, take a picture, send it to somebody. So we're proactive that way. In the essence of having a program where someone is tasked to do that year by year, we don't. But that would be part of this asset management program where we actually have basically an iPad that you can go out, take a picture. It automatically knows exactly where it is. It's in the system, and it'll create a work order, and then it'll be prioritized for repair, which just makes it so much easier and simpler for us to deal with and track.
Thank you. Councillor Corbeil.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Just on that topic, that would be a perfect opportunity for somebody in a return to work disability management function if, you know, they're unable to do their regular job for a week or two. But my question was, Rob, in our agenda package, it talks about roadway surface maintenance and road allowance maintenance, and I might be following up with questions that Councillor Washington and Councillor Solda asked. There's over $1 million in 2022 budgeted there. What kind of things does that entail? Roadway surface maintenance and roadway allowance maintenance?
So for operational, that is our staff going out and fixing potholes or significant damage to the roads. A good portion is that, identifying locations where there might be a safety concern, and so we'll be fixing smaller repairs, I'll say, like nothing more than something that's, say, 100 square meters or so. So it's going in, repairing those, as well as ongoing maintenance, crack sealing, removal of debris, these different types of tasks. What isn't there in our current capital program, and we do need to reinitiate, is in the past we've had what we call the pavement management system, and it again was a highly, it was probably from my generation anyway, not the younger folks, is a very intensive paper system, and so we are taking that system into, again, GIS so that we can track it and maintain it a lot easier. And we're in that process right now. And as we're doing that as well, that system literally just would look at your worst street to your best street, and you just focused on your worst street and kept fixing them. We want to put more lenses on that. What's the adjacent land use, such as, is it commercial? And so they're more, they more so require people to come to their front door that aren't aware that there's a pothole in front of their business, as opposed to, again, a cul-de-sac where there might be a pothole and everyone just swerves around it for a year because they know it's there. So we're trying to improve our systems, and at the same time, we're trying to not neglect the existing deficiencies we have. So in the future capital, we're kind of a bridge before we have an asset management plan, which we need is to identify in our capital some amount of money and then prioritize certain roads. And those roads would be roads as well that are arterials, like Third, where we have those wheel wells that really needs to be milled and paved. There's roads like that we should be focusing on, as opposed to, again, quieter streets that see less traffic or less heavy traffic. So I with the patience of council, this next fall, when we bring a new capital 5-year to them, it will be looking at those types of projects.
Thank you very much. Any additional questions? Okay, not seeing any more questions from council. Thank you very much again for all of this information and for probably a lot of work to compile it from all of these departments. So council, we have no correspondence. Is there any new business? Councillor Solda.
It's not really new business, it's old business, but regarding the welcoming sign, I know it's not a total capital project, but it's been a project that's been on the books, and I don't see it anywhere, so I'm just kind of curious to know.
Thank you. Great question. Scott, are you able to comment on where we're at with that project?
It is on our list. It has been previously funded, so it's not there. I have to say to council, we have not made significant progress on that. We continue to know it's important for us to look at, but we have not had an opportunity to make significant progress on that project at this time.
Thank you. Appreciate that there's a lot of projects on this 2022 to complete list, so can certainly understand that. Thank you for that, Councillor Solda. We will move on now to public input and question period. Would any members of the public like to ask a question or provide comment? Roland.
I might be stepping forward and stepping back a lot. First off is, Roland Smith, 2702 11th, to identify myself, which actually brings up a question from the last time I was here. We took a question from Anonymous, which I thought was a bit peculiar in that people are supposed to state their name and address to be at this podium, and yet the organization entertained a question from Anonymous and discussed it. So just trying to understand what the rules are and not necessarily, making a big stink about it, but it's just following the process, trying to understand where the goalposts are, because a few people sort of mentioned that to me, so I thought I'll raise it while I'm here. So what sort of happened there? Like, not to put anyone on the spot, but just to understand what happened there.
Yeah, Roland, I think that's a really fantastic point. And I remember hearing the question and going, anonymous, can people ask anonymous questions? But I will say that right now, and Twyla will probably want to comment as well, but we don't have a hybrid, terms of reference. So I think there's some things that we absolutely need to address when we update our procedures bylaw.
Perfect.
And that's one of them, absolutely. And, does it make sense for us to ask everyone who comes to the podium for their name and address? Is that the norm in communities now, or is it the allowance of letting people just ask a question? So, Twyla, did you want to add anything to that? But certainly to be reviewed.
Yeah, no, and certainly somewhat caught off guard with the anonymous piece
So
when it's
tight.
coming. Yes, when it's coming by, and wasn't anticipating that when I started reiterating the question. So yes, and also as Chair Minions indicated, we're lacking some processes in our formal procedure bylaw dealing with the hybrid models. So for sure, we'll look at that going forward.
Perfect.
Yeah, kind of in an in-between point where
Yeah.
we're trying to accommodate the hybrid model, in the world that we're living in,
Sure.
but we haven't really amended our procedures to be able to properly run it yet. So we'll get there, and thank you for bringing that up.
Yeah, growing pains with the new technology, right? So the 3rd Avenue Argyle to Mar beautification project, I noticed there are on the repurposing, the grant was unsuccessful, and I noticed in the report from the Director of Engineering with respect to the new SOMAS Forest Main, we pulled some money out of that project to help fund this now unexpected expense. What's happening with that project is that it says repurpose. Is that project now just going to be taken off the books?
Council hasn't given formal direction one way or another to that. What council did do, and so we formally defunded that project, and then, we changed the budget at the beginning of COVID, and we set aside some funds for smaller projects. So I would say through council doing that and then not adding a proper budget, that project is off the books as of right now. We made a lot of changes to our budget in that last minute. 2020 wasn't sure when what was happening with COVID, and that was one of the projects that had a significant reduction to it, and then now some funds repurposed. So there hasn't been formal direction from council.
Okay. On the topic of the Somas Force Main, pipe number 4, which is now we're dealing with, to clarify, what's the status of the 5th pipe? Is it also steel? And is it similar age? You may have been on council at the time, Chair Minions, when a former engineer brought a section of pipe from Stamp Avenue, and it was fascinating to see how over decades that the fines tumbling along actually cut through that pipe, which is why it was failing so many times, which brings up the concern if the other Somas River crossing, and the camera might not pick it up because perhaps that groove has sediment or something in there that as a camera passes through can't quite pick it up. And so I'm just curious, is that another, I know you can't answer that, maybe through to the director if you could, if there's some input on that, I'll stand aside for a minute.
Yeah, absolutely. I wasn't on council at that time. I would have liked to have seen that,
no,
but
it was fascinating. I was in the room
very
that night when
interesting.
they showed that. It was pretty, I guess Councillor Solder was probably.
Yeah, and Councillor
Yeah.
Washington would have
Yeah,
been as
yeah,
well. Yeah,
yeah.
thank you.
So could we-
Rob, are you able to provide any information on that at this time?
Definitely, we originally actually in our budget had a budget for the engineer to look at both pipes at the same time. Now what we're, obviously because of the priority of fixing this because it's broken, we're focusing on that. And from that, lessons learned after we finish construction, we would apply to that, replacing the next main as quickly as possible. I think they're built within a year of each other and they're the exact same material. The benefit to the other main is it doesn't have the same amount of fines that will actually drill eventually in the bottom of the pipe, as well as much flow. So we're hoping it will last longer, but we're going to fix this one first.
Thank you very much for that, Rob. Roland.
We're going back and forth probably. And on the CSO, there's something about a CSO. Get to the right page here. Where is CSO? Something about it being moved. Which page was that on? I'm understanding, if I'm interpreting right, is that this is an inspection of the piping, so that we have an understanding of what other CSO projects are. I know there's a long-term process, but I noticed one CSO project was taken off the list, and the 7th Avenue to Redford, it's been reallocated this year because of the Somas Force Main, but it doesn't appear in future years, at least not right now. It doesn't mean it's not coming back, but at least on this plan, it's not in 23, 24, or 25. It just sort of, it was originally allocated when this budget was started to be put together, and now it's gone and it doesn't come back. So I'm presuming that is another, it's going to need to be dealt with. Is that coming back in a future year?
Thank you. I'm going to ask Rob to answer that question as well.
I'll step aside.
Thank you.
Thank you. So one of the reports we brought to council, I think it was last summer, we talked about and we reallocated some funding, and some of that funding was for a consultant to start looking at prioritizing these projects. Because right now, any money we spend is good money, I would say, but at some point it's going to be a question of which catchment should we be spending this money in, and then trying to prioritize the social impacts versus the environmental versus the actual economic impacts of each project. So that, what we're doing is we're trying to finalize that this year, and I really hope it's done this year, but definitely by next year, and then that will just feed in and create this project list, so then you'll see these projects come back on by priority.
Thank you for that, Roland.
So carrying on the McLean Mill septic, I'm presuming this, the consultant's report we're talking about is the Rock Creek Environmental. So that's good, and we know it's something that needs to be done, but I'm just interested in that when you read that report, it doesn't talk about just flushing. There's constant reference in that report to it's an existing system that's not compliant no drawings, and no formal documentation filed with VIHA. And I'm not sure that any property owner would be permitted to operate a septic system without drawings or documentation filed with VIHA and a statement from an inspector that says it's not compliant, in existence, but not compliant. So clearly it looks like it's going to be addressed this year, so that's good. But in the meantime, until it is done, what happens? Are we just continuing to use it when there's several references in this particular report, 42-page report, where it's non-compliant? So we all know what non-compliance gets everybody in around here without going into any more detail, right? So how is the city addressing that in the short term? Because clearly the land's now out of the ALR, so that hurdle's over, but there's still this, it's yet another issue with this property of the many that we've been working through. What's the plan for that?
Thank you. Willa?
Thank you, Madam Chair. So that would be one of the components as we work with the current consultant to go back and verify as well that what is the long-term plan sufficient? Does that still make sense? Is it still within the current budget allocated? And also in the interim, before those shifts are made, how do we either ensure that we are compliant or have verified permission to operate as we are? So that's all part of the components we're working with the consultant.
Thank you. Councillor Solda.
So, Madam Mayor, just to ask a question, we have lots of events that are, the Chamber of Commerce has lots of events planned up there. So how is that going to work if we're in non-compliance?
That would all be part of the plan, to figure out the contingency that if there's adjustments that need to be made to events or to operating that site, we would make those concessions to ensure that all events would move forward without a hitch.
And the Chamber is aware of that totally?
Yes, yeah, the Chamber of Commerce has been involved right from the beginning before we signed an agreement with them, the current status of the site, yes.
Because I've heard of the problems in the past that happened up there with the sewer with events, and it wasn't very pretty, so I'm just asking that question. Thank you.
I think important to note that we are all aware of this because it did come to council. You'll recall that we had Dr. Hasselback, who was our medical health officer at the time, come and speak to the issue as well. And it has been ongoing. I'm happy to hear that flushing has been done as maintenance, even if we have a system that does not meet the standard of what we need it to. Potentially, it's still important that we maintain that system, so that we all can be comfortable that it is operating to the best of its ability. And I don't want to go into too much detail on this today. If there are additional questions, I think we could request a written report because there is so much history on this issue. And as we know, there was septic inspectors and different septic contractors and so much detail in this issue that I don't think, getting into too much debate around it in a verbal way is going to serve us. I think if there's additional questions, we should get written information so that we can all be reminded of the background and get a better understanding of where we're at. But thank you for that, Willa.
Thank you.
Roland. And if there are additional questions, please feel free to ask them. We would just ask for a written report.
Sure, yeah, no, that's fine. The other one was the underground storage tanks. It said that 30,000 is being taken away to reallocate for McLean Mill projects. So presuming these are old petroleum tanks, and we know homeowners, my neighbor's one, that spent $20,000 to remove a furnace oil tank, because once it was identified, they didn't care that it had been dormant for 30 years, it needed to be taken out. So I'm not saying that these tanks necessarily have to come out, but is it verbal that the city doesn't have to take them out, or is there a certificate of compliance, or is there some documentation from some authority that says these tanks are deemed to be of no material impact to the environment, and unlike a private residence where a furnace oil tank has to be taken out, that in this case on a, I guess, commercial property, that's not required, although I'm still not clear on that because we've got service stations around town where they dig the tanks out and the land lies fallow for years before someone can do something. So could I get some clarity on that from whoever might know?
Sure, Rob. Thanks, Roland.
Not the smartest, but I'll always volunteer. We actually went out on site with the fellow who wrote the report on those tanks. We dipped them to make sure they were empty, and they are empty. So at this point, removing them or not removing them isn't going to impact the contamination that may or may not have occurred. We've also done some test pitting in that around the locations to see, and we're monitoring to see if it's actually migrating. If it's migrating, and we'll see that over the next year or two, then we need to deal with it much more quickly. Do we have a certificate? No. So we are still not compliant until we actually do the remediation and determine what that is. But at this time, in my opinion, it is not the priority on that site.
Thank you very much for that, Rob. And I think, again, just from my perspective, I think if there's additional questions around an issue like this that is, a big important issue, and specifically around whether or not we are compliant, we really should get a written report so that we're all reminded of the background, because this has been ongoing for so many years. And of course, important to note as well that this is how we got the site, right? And we weren't, required by the federal government at the time to do remediations. Doesn't mean they're not required today, but Roland, if you have more questions.
So on the Connect the Keys, Madam Chair, in 2021, $4 million is listed as allocated for this project, which suggests that the city was successful in getting $2.5 million in grant funding, because the source of the funding is $750 from general revenue reserves, $388 from gas tax, $2.5 million from federal or provincial assistance, $90,000 from other, and $272,000 from capital works reserves. Excluding the federal and provincial, that's $1.41 million from taxpayers, but the amount in the plan says there's $4 million. You're adding $1,841,000 this year, which takes us to a larger number, obviously. 200,000 from reserves and another 1.6 million from parks reserves. What have we gotten the grant? Have we gotten 2.5 million?
We have not heard on our grant yet, but when council did give approval for moving forward with the planning of the next phase, and as our engineer said, starting construction of it, we're very clear at that point that was subject to hearing on the grant. If we didn't hear on the grant, then the scope of work that we're able to do this year would be changed.
Okay.
Reconsidered at that point.
Okay, so adding without the grant, last year and this year, you have now requisitioned through approved financial plans $3.25 million for this project. That's just the math. So, and next year another 1.25 million. So we sound like we're going ahead with it. And you spent 300 and some odd thousand on it already. I guess that's on consulting and design. When do you expect to hopefully hear from the grant? Do we have an idea?
We do have an idea that we'll hear very soon.
Okay, well, hopefully that's positive for all of us, right? The last thing is, at the audit committee meeting with the committee members who were there and the financial director, we had a very good discussion about projects that have been populating the list and we're sort of falling behind on, and we're gradually getting there now, which is good. One of them is the water meters. I know another citizen has brought this up before, and I double-checked the archive financial plans for the city to be absolutely certain I had these numbers right. Beginning in 2017, 150K from operating was allocated, 2018, 400K, 2019, 400K, 2020, 400 from reserves, and last year 400 from operating, for a total of 1.75 million allocated to this water meter project that was beginning in 2017, running for 6 years, which means we're in the final year of replacement of the water meters. but it only shows around 169,000 spent. So I guess the question is, where are we on the water meter replacement? Because mine is 25 years old. Maybe some of this is going to have to come back after, in fairness to the Director of Engineering. I'm presuming most connections have a meter. Maybe they don't every connection. So how many meters does the city actually have to replace? I have an idea when they were installed, probably 25 or so years ago. What was the expected lifespan of those meters at the time they were installed? How many actually have been rotated out? And there's a lot of talk, including this chamber, about cost escalation with inflation. Inflation's a double-edged sword. You've set tax rates and service rates. Requisition this money from property owners. It's sitting somewhere and hasn't been spent. Inflation is eroding the purchasing power on one side and increasing the input costs on the other side every month we delay, and that gap gets wider, and you're going to need to plug it. So where are we, and is the city confident that this whole program is actually funded at this time?
Thank you. Rob, would you like to answer that today? And as Roland said, any information that you don't have today, you're welcome to bring back. Thanks.
For the budget process, we will answer as many of those questions as we can, how many meters, and all those detailed questions. What I will say is, over the last few years, we've been reflecting on trying to do this with our existing resources. And obviously, our existing resources are being tasked on more important things almost on a daily basis. So we're watching this keep sliding. And so we just, probably about 6 months ago, started talking about how do we actually deliver this. If it is a challenge with our existing resources, then what are our options? And so what we will be bringing to council, and not during the budget process, but after, is an update with some solutions on what this looks like, and us trying to deliver this in the next year as far as we can, because this needs to get done. And we have, especially this past year, and this is why we started talking about this 6 months ago, is we're seeing inflation going up a lot more than in the past. So this very much is front of mind for us.
Thank you very much for that. Roland?
Last time. This one's for Andrew. I think Andrew thought he was going to get off, but maybe not. On today's agenda, page 18, your total revenue is stated for 2022, projected revenue, 40,370,885, which is the same as it was on page 9 of the Committee of the Whole agenda exactly 2 weeks ago. However, today, expenses on page 18 are at 45,594,941, which is 2.17 million more than it was on page 9 of March 7th at 43,400,000. So you haven't increased your revenue on the top lines by 2.2 million roughly, but your expenses have gone up on the bottom line of 2.2 million. So I think I have an idea how that works, but there's a more qualified person than me here to explain it. So if he could explain that, because and that's all for today, Madam Chair.
Thank you very much, Roland. Andrew?
Thank you, Mr. Smith. So what we've done is we've made some changes to the capital projects that we've had. They're not impacting the revenue, but they are impacting the reserves. So we had the Argyle Force Main. We've had the additional budget for the community or the public safety building, and then the Glenwood. All those are coming from our reserve accounts. So that's on the bottom of the financial plan. So that's just the adjustment that we need to do to support the projects that we've had for change. So hopefully does that make sense? Okay.
Thank you very much. Okay. Okay, are there other questions from members of the public? Come on forward, Joseph.
Hi, my name's Joseph. I live in Port Alberni, and just a quick question. I think something has come up at a number of meetings, and that's been line painting and sidewalks. And I'm just curious with that, what the city's liability is and something like that. Sidewalks, tripping hazards, injury. lines that are invisible on the driving. We live in Port Alberni, so we kind of know there's at 3rd and Roger, there's a merge lane and 2 lanes, but if we're not from here, that's no evidence of that. And so if I was driving my car and wander over and they say, well, you switch lanes and hit me, I go, what lanes? So I'm just wondering, with all of that sort of stuff that's there, what is the city's responsibility or liability for that as far as injury or accident? And is there any at all on the city with that? Yeah.
Thank you, Joseph. Twyla, are you able to speak to that at all?
I wouldn't feel comfortable responding to that on the fly. I can definitely bring back a report, though, if committee members would like that.
Great. Thank you very much. Council like a bit more information on that for our understanding? Great. Thank you. Okay. Are there any other questions from members of the public? Okay. Okay. Then seeing none, would somebody like to move adjournment? Moved by Councillor Solda, seconded by Councillor Poon. All in favor? Carried. Thank you. Thank you, everyone, for joining us.